And so part of clothing is protection, but a tremendous amount of it is merely stopping other people from evaluating you too harshly all the time. It just gets in the way. So anyways, this story makes the case that at some point we weren't like that. Well, animals aren't like that, so it seems perfectly plausible that at some point we weren't like that, but at some point that changed. And they were both naked, the man and his wife, and were not ashamed. Now the serpent was more subtle than any beast of the field which the Lord God had made. And he said unto the woman, Yea, hath God said, Ye shall not eat of every tree of the garden. I like this. This is, I can't remember who did the etching now. Who is it? Doré, yeah, Doré, exactly. Doré did etchings for Paradise Lost that are absolutely remarkable. And this is Satan, and this is the snake here. And of course, in the Genesis story, Satan is weirdly associated with the snake. And I'll tell you, that's a tough one to sort out, because in the story of Adam and Eve, there's no indication whatsoever that the serpent who tempts Eve is also Satan, the author of all evil. And how in the world those two stories got tangled together, well, I think I figured that out, and I'm going to tell you that tonight, but it took a very long time to figure it out. And it's so bloody brilliant. I just can't believe that people figured it out. It's so unbelievably, spectacularly brilliant. And that's an intimation of that idea, right? That there's a kinship between these two things. So anyways, the serpent's more subtle than any beast of the field. Subtle's an interesting word. This is from the Oxford English Dictionary. So, because we'll amplify the word a bit, this is what you do in Jungian dream interpretation, for example, is to kind of look at the connotations of the concepts that are associated with the dream. Subtle, of a person or animal in action, behavior, crafty, cunning, sly, treacherous. So it's something that sort of sneaks along, right? It's not something that you really pick up on that easily. Of a look or glance, sly, furtive, surreptitious. Of a person, skillful, expert, clever. Of a work of art, mechanical device, cleverly made or designed, ingenious. Well, I think that's all fairly, all those terms so far are fairly well attributed to snakes. I mean, they are very cool things, and they are very well designed, and they're quite remarkable, and they're also very subtle. On the nature of or involving careful discrimination of fine points, difficult to understand and abstruse. Of a person, the mind, or intellectual activity characterized by wisdom or perceptiveness, discriminating, discerning, and shrewd. That's interesting because Milton's Satan is also the intellect. And you see that very often. It's so often the bad guy's an evil scientist, right? And there's something about, and you see the same thing in The Lion King with Scar. I mean, Scar's an intellect, an arrogant, deceitful intellect. There's nothing stupid about Scar. He's not wise. But he's the evil voice that's always whispering in the king's ear. And that's associated with the pride of the intellect. And the Catholics had warned humanity about the pride of the intellect for centuries. That's partly what produced somewhat of the schism between Catholicism and science, although that's much overstated if you look at the historical record. The idea was that the intellect has its own particular, it's a remarkable faculty. Let's say it's the highest angel in God's heavenly kingdom. That's the way that Milton portrayed it. But it's also the thing that can go most terribly wrong, because the intellect can become arrogant about its own existence and accomplishments, and it can fall in love with its own products. And that's what happens when you're ideologically possessed, because you end up with a dogma, like say a human constructed dogma in Solzhenitsyn's words, that possesses you completely, of which you believe is 100% right? So it eradicates the necessity for anything transcendent. And so that's the subtle element of the intellect that's associated symbolically with the snake in the Garden of Paradise. Of a feeling, sense, sensation, acute and keen, involving distinctions that are fine or delicate, especially to such an extent as to be difficult to discern or analyze, also almost imperceptible and elusive, having little thickness or breadth, thin, fine, subtle matter, now historical, rarefied matter, barely there at all. And the woman said unto the serpent, We may eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden, but of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God has said, Ye shall not eat of it, neither shall you touch it, lest ye die. And the serpent said to the woman, Ye shall not surely die. For God doth know in the day that you eat thereof, then your eyes shall be opened, and you shall be as gods, knowing good and evil. Sneaky, subtle. It's a nice story, eh? The first thing is the instant implication is, well, you can't trust God. So that's pretty sneaky. And the next is, well, he's trying to pull a fast one on you. And the next one is, well, he's trying to do that because he's jealous and he doesn't want you to know things that he knows, because that wouldn't be so good. And he's lying to you anyways, because you're not going to die. And if you eat it, contrary to what you've been informed, then all that's going to happen is your eyes will be open and you'll be like gods, knowing good and evil. Well, that sounds pretty damn good. So, you know, and I mean, Eve, what does she know? You know, it's no wonder she's susceptible to such blandishments. And it's quite interesting too, because Adam and Eve, God tells Adam and Eve not to eat the damn fruit, but they never promise not to, right? So they haven't promised, they've just been told to. And well, should they be obedient? Well, how obedient do you want your children to be? You want them to be obedient enough so they don't get hurt, but disobedient enough so that they go out in the world and do something courageous, and they break some rules, and they learn some things. And so, you know, it's a very paradoxical story. Anyways, the serpent wins this round, man. And so Eve pays attention to the snake. So again, we have the same set of images, right? We have Adam and we have Eve. We have this tree and we have this strange serpent. That's a dragon-like form. They're a sphinx-like form that's associated with the tree. The snake's eternally associated with the tree. Well, the snake was eternally associated with the tree. We spent, God only knows how many tens of millions of years as tree-dwelling primates. And the primary, or one of our primary predators, we had 3 primary predators: snakes, birds, cats. And so the snake has been associated with the tree for a very, very long time. And the lesson the snake tells people is, you bloody well better wake up, or something you don't like will get you. And who's going to be most susceptible to paying attention to the snake? And that's going to be Eve. And the reason for that is Eve has offspring. And there's nothing tastier to a snake than a child. And so Eve had every reason to be self-conscious and neurotic. And women are more self-conscious and neurotic than men by quite a substantial amount. And that's true cross-culturally, and it emerges at puberty. And part of the reason is, as far as we can tell, is that women are more sexually vulnerable. They're also smaller. So that's a problem if you're engaged in any physical alteration. But most importantly, I think, is that why would you ever assume that a human female's nervous system is adapted to her or her well-being? Why wouldn't you assume instead that her nervous system is adapted to the female infant dyad? Because if it isn't, then the infants die. And so you might think, well, women are way more susceptible to depression and anxiety than men are. And that's a hell of a burden to bear. And that's also true cross-culturally, by the way. And it also kicks in at puberty. And the biggest differences are in Scandinavia, for those of you who think it's sociocultural, which it isn't. So, but there's reasons for it, you know, and it's also at puberty when men and women start to become sexually dimorphic in terms of size, and men are way more powerful in their upper bodies. It's incomparably more powerful, and so that makes them a lot more dangerous. And the primary human defense mechanism is punching, like with kangaroos, because there's some other animals that punch. Chimps can punch too, but human beings, it's a punch, and most of the force in that is upper body and shoulder. And so a woman's no match for a man in a fight. And so she has every reason to be nervous, especially when you add to that her additional sexual vulnerability and the fact that she has to take care of extraordinarily dependent infants who are extremely fragile for a very long period of time. And so she had and women are more self-conscious than men. The empirical literature on that is clear. It's associated with trait neuroticism, because self-consciousness is actually an unpleasant emotion. Who wants to be self-conscious? If I'm self-conscious on the stage talking to you, then all of a sudden I can't even talk to you. All I'm doing is thinking about me and all the things that are wrong with me, and I fall inside myself. It's like self-consciousness, although it's a great gift, let's say, is nothing pleasant. It's associated primarily with anxiety. So Eve had every reason to pay attention to the snake, that's for sure. I think I read this week that I can't remember which tribesman it was, unfortunately, although I did put a footnote in my new book about this. These were jungle-dwelling tribal people. 5% of the adults had been attacked by a python, and a substantial number of children had been killed by them. So snake predation was no joke. It shaped our evolutionary past, and still is no joke in many places. And so we're attuned to snakes. And the thing is, as Lynn Esbell pointed out, an anthropologist, we are really good at detecting the camouflage patterns of snakes, especially in the lower half of our visual field. And there's evidence that part of the reason that human beings have such acute vision, which means that our eyes opened, let's say, is because we co-evolved with snakes and we learned how to see them. And then the price we paid for seeing was that our brain grew, because you need a lot of brain to be able to see. And the consequence of our brain growing is one day we woke up and discovered the future. And the future is where all the snakes might live instead of where they live right now. So there's that. The same thing, and the same, so interesting, again, these images, you see, in this one, you have the specter of death in the tree with the snake and the fruit. Now, fruit is interesting too. I already made the case that there's a tight linkage between what you eat and information, right? A conceptual link as well as a practical link. But it's also the case that we can see colors. And the question is, why? And the answer is because we evolved to see ripe fruit. So in the story of Adam and Eve, human beings are given vision by the snake and the fruit. And that turns out to be correct. So isn't that something? And then you think, what role do women play in relationship to men? Well, first, they make them self-conscious. Let's not ever forget about that. Because I would say the primary role that women have in relationship to men is to make them self-conscious. And men don't precisely like that. There's nothing that will make a man more self-conscious than being rejected. And why? Because why is he rejected? Well, obviously, Mother Nature, in the guise of that particular woman, has said, you're not so bad for a friend, but there's no reason that your genetic material should propagate itself into the future. Right, well, and it's not like men are exactly happy about being made self-conscious by women, right? It's a major source of continual tension between men and women, and it's no wonder. But it's also the case, and this is something really cool and interesting to know, you know, we diverged, whatever, that's it, diverged. We diverged from the common ancestor between us and chimpanzees about 6 million years ago. Here's why, at least in part. Chimpanzee females are non-discriminate maters. They'll mate with any male. When they go into heat, which human females don't, when they go into heat, then any male is allowed access. Now the dominant males chase the subordinate males away. And so the dominant males are more likely to leave offspring, but it's not because of the female choice. It's not the case with human beings. Human females engage in hypergamy, and hypergamy is and this is also true cross-culturally, and it's also quite, it's just as extensive in Scandinavia. Not quite, there's a bit of attenuation, but not much. Women mate across and up dominance hierarchies. Men mate across and down. Okay, and that has to be the case because obviously it has to work that way. If one goes up, the other has to go down.